A millionaire marries his newly hired, unattractive maid on a bet, but what he discovers on their wedding night leaves him shocked. Before we begin the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The party at the Montero mansion was in full swing. Arthur Montero, the host of the evening, stood surrounded by his wealthy friends, all engaged in conversations fueled by champagne and inflated egos. Arthur, with his usual air of superiority, commanded the room's attention as he always did. Thomas Soriano, known for his sharp tongue and love of provocation, approached with a mocking smile. Holding a glass of wine, he fixed his gaze directly on Arthur. "Arthur," Thomas began, his voice dripping with mischief, "you're always saying that money can buy and change anything, that everything in this world can be transformed with the right price." Arthur raised an eyebrow, slightly bored. "Isn't it true? Money is the most powerful tool there is. With it, there are no limits." Thomas tilted his head, pretending to consider the response. "It's easy to say that here, surrounded by people who only tell you what you want to hear. But can you prove it?" The group around them fell silent, intrigued by the challenge. Arthur set his glass down on a nearby table and crossed his arms, his stance defiant. "And how exactly do you expect me to prove something that's already obvious?" Thomas stepped closer, a sly grin spreading across his face. "I'll bet you $5 million that you can't marry someone outside of our social circle, a woman who doesn't fit your standards of beauty or your world. And there's more. You must stay married to her for 3 months, convince the world the marriage is real, and completely transform her." Thomas's laughter echoed through the room, accompanied by a few murmurs and curious glances. The mood in the group shifted immediately as everyone waited for Arthur's response. Arthur let out a short, humorless laugh. "You can't be serious, Thomas? Me, married to a woman outside my standards? For 3 months? That's so ridiculous it doesn't even deserve an answer." Thomas ignored Arthur's initial refusal and casually glanced around the room. That's when he spotted Maria, carrying a tray of champagne glasses across the room. Her hair was tied back in a simple bun, and she wore a spotless black and white uniform. Her posture was humble, her eyes downcast as she diligently did her job. Thomas nodded toward her and chuckled. "What about her? Your maid. She's peculiar, completely outside your type, perfect for the challenge." Arthur followed Thomas's gaze and frowned when he recognized Maria. "You've got to be kidding me. Me, married to a maid? That's utterly absurd, even for you." "Why not?" Thomas countered, his smile full of provocation. "If money really does buy everything, this should be easy for you, right? After all, you're the great Arthur Montero. Or, are you afraid you'll lose the bet?" The guests around them held their breath, captivated by the rising tension. Arthur kept his gaze locked on Thomas, feeling the challenge strike at his pride. He knew that backing down now would make everyone see him as a coward, something he couldn't allow. Arthur licked his lips, carefully considering his next move. Finally, he picked up his glass of wine and took a small sip before declaring, with a cold smile, "Deal. 3 months with her. And I'll prove to you there's no challenge I can't conquer." The group erupted in murmurs and laughter, but Thomas simply smiled, satisfied. He extended his hand and Arthur shook it firmly, sealing the agreement. "This is going to be fun," Thomas said with a mocking tone. "But remember, you have to make it look real. I want to see her by your side at events, dressed like a high society lady. And if you fail, I'll be $5 million richer." Arthur narrowed his eyes. "I never fail, Thomas. Get ready to open your wallet." The next morning, Maria was in the kitchen washing dishes when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Arthur Montero standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets and his gaze fixed on her. "Mr. Montero, do you need something?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes, Maria," he replied, stepping closer. "I need to talk to you. It's about a proposal." Maria frowned, confused. "A proposal?" Arthur leaned in slightly, respite, carefully choosing his words. He knew that to convince Maria, he'd need to strike the right tone. "I want you to marry me." The plate slipped from Maria's hands, crashing into the sink and splashing water everywhere. "What?" "You heard me right." Arthur kept his tone calm, as if discussing business. "It's a contract, a marriage of convenience. You'll be my wife for 3 months, and in return, I'll pay you an amount that could change your life." Maria let out a nervous laugh, as though he were joking. That's not funny, Mr. Montero. I'm not joking, Maria. He pulled a check from his pocket and placed it on the counter. The amount was enough to solve any financial problem for years. You're struggling, aren't you? With this money, you can start fresh. So what do you say? Maria looked at the check and then back at Arthur. She knew this man was used to controlling everything around him. It was clear he didn't see her as a person, but rather as a means to achieve something. Why me? She asked, trying to understand. Because you're perfect for it, Arthur replied bluntly. It's simple. No one would expect me to marry someone like you. That's exactly why it will work. Arthur's brutal honesty made her uncomfortable. Maria wanted to say no, wanted to walk away. But the overdue bills and the weight of caring for her family pressed heavily on her heart. And if I agree, what happens after the 3 months? We get divorced, he answered indifferently. No questions, no ties. You go back to your life and I go back to mine. But you'll be in a much better position than when you started. Maria took a deep breath. She knew entering this arrangement was like selling a part of herself, but maybe it was her only chance to change her reality. I accept, she finally said. Arthur smiled, satisfied. Great, tomorrow you'll be my wife. Maria watched him leave the kitchen with a heavy heart. She knew she was stepping into a dangerous game, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope that things might change. The next morning began with a different tension at the Montero mansion. The staff whispered in the hallways, puzzled by Arthur's behavior. After all, it was unusual to see him spending so much time at home, especially dressed formally so early. But for Maria, the day had started like any other, cleaning, organizing, and staying invisible. She was in the side garden, kneeling as she gathered fallen leaves from one of the old trees. The scent of wet grass mingled with the fragrance of flowers, and for a moment, Maria felt a brief sense of peace. Then Arthur's shadow interrupted her tranquility. Maria, he called, standing beside her. She stood up quickly, wiping her hands on the edge of her uniform without realizing she was spreading dirt on her apron. Her eyes met Arthur's, and she saw something different there, determination and what seemed like expectation. Mr. Montero, she replied, trying to hide her discomfort. Everything's ready. We're going to the registry office in an hour. Maria blinked, confused. Registry office? Already? Yes. The sooner we start, the better. Arthur placed his hands in his pockets, his tone cold and direct. The documents are ready. You just need to sign. Maria's heart raced. Until now, the proposal had seemed distant, an absurd idea she thought she could still reverse. But now, with the formality of marriage imminent, it all felt very real. I need more time, she said hesitantly. Arthur tilted his head, observing her. Time for what? You already agreed, Maria? And I'm not used to waiting. She wanted to back out, but memories of her humble home, her younger siblings' tired faces, and the mounting debts held her back. Sighing, she nodded. All right, she said in a low voice. I'm ready. An hour later, Maria was seated in the back of Arthur's car, a black limousine that felt even more uncomfortable than the situation she was in. The driver drove in silence while Arthur typed messages on his phone, oblivious to her presence. She looked out the window, watching the city rush by. Where she came from, downtown felt like a completely different universe. Huge buildings, luxury stores, and well-dressed people who never looked around. We're here, Arthur said suddenly, putting his phone away. The car stopped in front of a discreet but imposing building. Maria got out hesitantly, while Arthur held the door for her. Inside the registry office, 2 lawyers were already waiting, along with a small group of staff who had clearly been instructed not to ask questions. Maria's stomach turned as she picked up the pen to sign the papers. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. In just a few minutes, she was officially Mrs. Montero. Arthur shook the registrar's hand and turned to Maria with a light smile. Congratulations. We're officially husband and wife now. It's not exactly like that, Maria murmured without looking at him. Arthur didn't respond. He simply guided her back to the car, where the silence between them felt even heavier than before. When they arrived at the mansion, Maria noticed something different. The curtains had been replaced, the lighting was softer, and a new decoration adorned the main hall. There was something almost theatrical about the atmosphere, as if the entire house was preparing for a grand performance. Arthur led her upstairs and stopped in front of a door. He opened it, revealing a luxurious bedroom with an enormous bed, velvet curtains, and a closet larger than the house Maria lived in. "This will be your room," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Maria stepped inside, glancing around. Every detail seemed to whisper that she didn't belong there. "It's beautiful," she said, unsure of what else to say. "I hope you're satisfied. And remember, you're my wife now. It's important that everyone believes it, especially the people in my circle." Maria turned to him, crossing her arms. "And what exactly do you expect from me, Mr. Montero?" Arthur raised an eyebrow, surprised by her defiance. He was used to being obeyed without question, but Maria didn't seem willing to make things easy. "I expect you to play the part," he said firmly. "Elegant dresses, perfect posture, and no impulsive behavior." Maria let out a short laugh. "Oh, of course, because appearances are all that matter here, aren't they?" Arthur frowned, but didn't respond. He knew she was right, but wouldn't admit it. "You'll have everything you need. Tomorrow morning, a stylist will come to help you choose appropriate clothes." Maria sighed, feeling the weight of it all. She didn't want to accept it, but she knew she was trapped in this arrangement. "Fine. If that's what you want, I'll do my part, but don't expect me to change who I am." Arthur shrugged, as if it didn't matter to him. "That's your problem, Maria. As long as you stick to the agreement, I don't care who you are." With that, he left the room, leaving Maria alone in the vast, cold space. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling small and out of place. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back. 3 months, she whispered to herself. Just 3 months. Meanwhile, outside, Arthur walked down the stairs with determined steps, his mind already focused on the next moves in the bet. He couldn't quite explain it, but there was something about Maria that unsettled him. She wasn't like the others in his life, and that bothered him. The game had begun, but neither of them was prepared for the twists the future held. The next morning, Maria was awakened by the sound of soft knocks at the door. Before she could respond, an elegant and imposing woman in a perfectly tailored suit entered the room with confident steps. Behind her, 2 assistants carried a rack full of luxurious dresses. "Good morning, Mrs. Montero," the woman said with a professional smile. "My name is Clara, and I was hired by your husband to help you dress appropriately for upcoming events." Still sitting on the bed, Maria blinked in confusion. "Upcoming events?" Clara nodded, beginning to arrange the dresses around the room. "Yes, Mr. Montero believes appearance is essential, especially for someone in your position. That's why he ordered a complete wardrobe for you." Maria scoffed, slowly standing up. "Is this really necessary?" Clara paused from organizing the dresses and looked directly at Maria without losing her composure. "With all due respect, ma'am, necessary or not, it's what he wants. I suggest you make the most of it." Maria wanted to argue, but practicality won. "Fine, let's just get this over with." Clara smiled in approval. "Excellent choice." Over the next few hours, Maria was dressed, fitted, and styled, while the assistants discussed fabrics and styles as if she were a doll. Despite feeling uncomfortable, Maria noticed that while the dresses were expensive, they couldn't entirely hide who she was. Deep down, she knew no outfit could truly make her fit into this world. When she finally descended the stairs, Arthur was waiting in the main hall, seated in a leather armchair. He glanced up from the tablet he was holding and examined her in silence. "Not bad," he commented, with a tone so indifferent it deeply irritated her. "Thanks, I guess," Maria replied, crossing her arms. Arthur stood up and adjusted his tie, ignoring her sarcasm. "We have an event tonight, a dinner with some of my friends. It's important that you're prepared." Maria narrowed her eyes. "A dinner? And when exactly were you planning to tell me about this?" "Now," he said, as if the answer were obvious. Maria sighed, tired of that attitude. "Fine, but don't expect me to pretend to be someone I'm not, Arthur." Arthur gave a slight smile. "As long as you don't embarrass me, that's all that matters." The dinner was held at a luxurious restaurant known for its exclusive clientele and extravagant decor. When Arthur and Maria arrived, all eyes immediately turned to them. While he walked with his usual confidence, Maria followed by his side, trying to ignore the curious stares. At the table, Thomas was already waiting along with 2 other friends who had been part of the bet. As soon as Maria sat down, Thomas gave a sarcastic smile. "So this is the famous Mrs. Montero," he said, his tone bordering on mockery. Maria felt her face flush, but she maintained her composure. Yes, that's me. Thomas laughed. I have to admit, Arthur, you've outdone yourself this time. Arthur gave Thomas a cold glare but said nothing. He knew that reacting would only make his friends enjoy it more. Maria, however, decided she wouldn't let Thomas get away with it. And you, Thomas, do you usually spend so much time judging other people's lives? The question caught the table off guard. Thomas choked on his wine, while the others chuckled discreetly. Arthur looked at Maria, surprised, but didn't intervene. There was something about her attitude that he couldn't ignore. Strength and courage, even in such a hostile environment. The dinner continued with superficial conversations, but Maria could tell she was being scrutinized the entire time. Every gesture, every word seemed to be observed by Arthur's friends. She felt like she was on display, but she didn't let it show. When they finally left the restaurant, Maria let out a sigh of relief as she got into the car. That was interesting, she said, looking out the window. Arthur leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on her. You handled it well. Maria turned to him, surprised by the compliment. Thanks, I guess. Arthur gave a half smile but said nothing. He realized he had underestimated Maria, and that left him unsettled. In the following days, Maria started to get used to the routine at the mansion, though she still felt out of place. The staff, who had initially looked at her with suspicion, began to respect her for her humility and dedication. Meanwhile, Arthur watched everything from a distance. He was a man used to controlling every detail of his life, but Maria represented a mystery he couldn't quite figure out. One night, while reviewing documents in his office, he heard light footsteps approaching. He looked up and saw Maria standing at the door, holding a cup of tea. You look like you need a break, she said, walking in without asking for permission. Arthur raised an eyebrow, surprised by her boldness. And you think you can tell me what to do? Maria shrugged, placing the cup on the desk. It doesn't hurt to try. Arthur picked up the cup, inhaling the scent of fresh herbs. Thanks, he said after a moment's hesitation. Maria sat in one of the office chairs, glancing at the papers scattered across the desk. You work a lot. Someone has to, he replied curtly. Maria smiled lightly. Even so, you should rest sometimes. Arthur looked at her, intrigued. There was something about her simplicity that unsettled him, as if she reminded him of something he'd long forgotten. You're different, he said without thinking. Maria tilted her head, surprised. Different how? I don't know. Arthur shook his head, trying to push the thought away. Just different. Maria laughed softly. I guess I'll take that as a compliment. She stood up, ready to leave, but before going, she looked at him one last time. Good night, Arthur. Good night, Maria, he replied without looking away. When the door closed, Arthur leaned back in his chair, still holding the teacup. For the first time in a long while, he felt oddly at peace, though he couldn't understand why. The next morning, Arthur called Maria to the backyard garden, where an unusual setup awaited. A table was set under the large oak tree, filled with books, silverware, crystal glasses, and a small notepad. In the tree's shade stood Clara, Maria's stylist, with a formal smile. Beside her was an elegant woman with gray hair who radiated authority. Maria narrowed her eyes at the scene. As she approached, Arthur turned to her with an impassive tone. Maria, this is Esther, he said, indicating the woman with gray hair. She's an etiquette and manners specialist. Over the next few weeks, you'll have daily lessons to learn how to behave according to your new position. Maria frowned. Etiquette lessons? Are you serious? Completely serious, Arthur said, crossing his arms and looking at her as if daring her to refuse. You need to know how to behave at the events I attend. We can't leave anything to chance. Maria let out a short, incredulous laugh. Of course. Because nothing is more important than looking perfect for the people you want to impress, right? Exactly, he replied, ignoring the sarcasm. Let's begin. Maria knew she was stuck in this arrangement and couldn't simply walk away, but that didn't mean she was going to make things easy for Arthur. She sat down at the table, crossing her arms. All right, teach me how to be perfect then. The first lessons were a true test of patience for both of them. Esther, with her impeccable posture and almost unshakable calm, demonstrated how to hold a wine glass properly, use the correct utensils, and walk gracefully. Maria, on the other hand, made a point of deliberately making small mistakes just to see Arthur's reaction. "Maria," Esther said, holding back a sigh as Maria accidentally dropped a fork on the floor for the third time. "You need to focus." "I'm trying," Maria replied with a mischievous smile. Arthur, observing everything from a distance, narrowed his eyes. "Maria, you know this is necessary." "Necessary for whom? For you?" "Because I'm perfectly fine the way I am." Maria glared at him, her gaze challenging. "It's necessary for both of us," Arthur said firmly. "I don't make bets to lose." Maria scoffed but picked up the fork again. Despite her rebellious attitude, part of her wanted to show she could learn, not to please Arthur, but to prove he didn't have the power to define who she was. As the days passed, Maria began to notice subtle changes in her routine. The etiquette lessons became less annoying as she started mastering the basics. However, her relationship with Arthur remained tense. One evening during dinner, Arthur watched Maria closely as she ate, clearly waiting to catch her making a mistake. Aware of his gaze, she placed her fork and knife perfectly on her plate and smiled at him. "Are you satisfied?" she asked, her tone defiant. Arthur gave a half-smile. "I'll admit you're improving." "Well, I'm a dedicated student," Maria replied with a hint of irony. Despite the teasing tone, something felt different between them that night. For the first time, Arthur seemed to see Maria as more than just her appearance or her challenging attitude. He was starting to realize she was stronger and smarter than he had assumed. The next morning, Arthur took Maria to her first mission in high society. A charity brunch hosted by one of his business partners, Clarice Belmont. Maria, dressed in an elegant blue gown chosen by Clara, entered the room with Arthur, feeling every eye turned toward her. Though nervous, she kept her head high. Clarice, a sophisticated and imposing woman, approached them with a polite smile. "Arthur, darling, and who is this lovely lady?" "This is my wife, Maria," Arthur said with a forced smile. Clarice raised her eyebrows in surprise, but quickly masked her reaction with a cordial handshake. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Maria." Arthur never mentioned he was married. Maria smiled politely, fully aware that Clarice was simply being polite. "The pleasure is mine." During the brunch, Maria noticed the guests watching her with curiosity, clearly trying to figure out how someone like her ended up with a man like Arthur. But instead of feeling intimidated, she used it as motivation. "Let's have some fun with those who only read the comments." Type milkshake in the comments. Only those who read this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. When Clarice asked Maria her thoughts on philanthropy, Maria answered honestly, "I think helping others shouldn't be limited to events like this. It's something we can all do in our daily lives, even in small ways." Her response caught everyone by surprise. Arthur, who was about to intervene, stopped and watched. The guests seemed genuinely impressed. "An interesting perspective," Clarice said, raising her glass of champagne. "Arthur, it seems your wife has much to teach us all." Maria felt a mix of pride and relief. For the first time, it seemed like she had managed to hold her own in that unfamiliar world. Back at the mansion, Arthur stopped in the hallway and turned to Maria. "You were impressive today." Maria raised an eyebrow, surprised by the compliment. "Is that a compliment?" "Yes," he said with a faint smile. "You managed to win people over, even though you're completely different from them." Maria chuckled, crossing her arms. "Maybe because I'm not trying to be like them." Arthur looked at her for a moment, as if seeing something new. "Maybe that's what makes them so intrigued by you." Maria glanced away, feeling uneasy at his tone. "Well, I just did what I thought was right." "Keep it up, Maria," he said before walking away. She stood in the hallway, watching him disappear upstairs. For the first time, she felt she was starting to understand Arthur. Beneath all the coldness and arrogance, there was something more, something he hid from everyone, even himself. As the weeks went by, the forced coexistence between Maria and Arthur began to reveal hidden layers of both. Despite the constant teasing and power games between them, Arthur couldn't help but notice that Maria seemed to carry an invisible burden. One night, he found her in the mansion's garden, sitting alone on a stone bench. She was holding something in her hands, a small notebook she leafed through absent-mindedly, a melancholy expression on her face. "It's late," Arthur said, announcing his presence. Maria startled, quickly closing the notebook. "I couldn't sleep." "Neither could I," he he replied, walking toward her. "What are you reading?" "It's just something of mine," she answered evasively. Arthur sensed her discomfort and let the matter drop, but his curiosity had been piqued. There was something important about that notebook, and he wanted to know what it was. The next day, while Maria was helping in the kitchen, Arthur sat in his office, his thoughts divided between the reports he was reading and the image of her in the garden. He didn't know why, but that little notebook intrigued him more than he wanted to admit. Shortly after lunch, while Maria was busy downstairs, Arthur went to her room. He hesitated before opening the door, but finally gave in to his curiosity. On the dresser, next to a vase of wilted flowers, was the notebook. He picked it up carefully, flipping through the pages. What he found surprised him. Notes and sketches, almost like a diary. Some pages contained doodles of flowers and landscapes, while others were filled with bits of text and thoughts. One page, in particular, caught his attention. There was a drawing of two small children holding hands with a woman. Below it was a note. "I promise to protect them, no matter the cost." Arthur frowned. Who were those children? He didn't know Maria had siblings or children. That evening, during dinner, Arthur couldn't hide his unease. He watched Maria closely, trying to decipher her. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she finally asked, setting her fork down. "Do you have siblings?" he asked, ignoring her question. Maria froze for a moment but quickly regained her composure. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," he replied, revealing nothing. Maria averted her gaze, clearly uncomfortable. "I have two younger brothers. They're fine. At least I hope they are." "You don't talk to them?" Maria sighed, placing her fork down. "There's not much to say. It's been years since we've been in touch. They live with an aunt in another city." Arthur noticed the bitterness in her voice, but didn't press further. He knew there was more to the story, but understood he would need patience to get answers. A few days later, while Maria was out with Clara, Arthur called his trusted assistant, Marcos, for a conversation. "I want you to find out everything you can about Maria," he said, handing him a photo. "Anything specific, Mr. Montero?" Marcos asked, curious. "Family, past, anything she might be hiding." Arthur avoided looking at his assistant, feeling a pang of guilt for what he was doing. "Understood. I'll report back soon." The next morning, Arthur received a report from Marcos. It was a complete dossier on Maria. He read it in silence, feeling the weight of each page. Maria had grown up in a humble neighborhood, taking care of her two younger brothers from a young age. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was only 17, leaving her as the sole caretaker of the children. For a few years, she worked 2 jobs to support them, but eventually lost custody because she couldn't provide a stable home. Arthur felt a tightness in his chest as he imagined Maria facing all that alone. He had never stopped to consider that she might have endured such hardships. Among the documents was an old photo of Maria and her brothers. She looked so young and full of hope, holding the children in her arms. That night, Arthur found Maria again in the garden, sitting on the same bench where he had seen her before. This time, he approached more cautiously and sat down beside her. "I need to ask you something," he said directly. Maria looked at him warily. "What is it now? Why have you never mentioned your family?" Maria pressed her lips together, surprised by the question. "I don't see how that's any of your business." "Maybe it's not," he replied, his tone softer. "But I read about what happened." Maria's eyes widened. "You read? What did you do?" Arthur sighed. "I needed to know who you really are, Maria, and now I do." She stood up abruptly, crossing her arms. "Do you think you can just invade my life like this? My story isn't some game for you to explore, Arthur." "I'm not playing, Maria," he said, standing as well. "I just wanted to understand why you're so guarded, so closed off. And now I do. You've fought alone for so long that you believe you can't trust anyone." Maria shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you lost everything," he said firmly, "and yet you never gave up. That's more than I can say about most people I know." Maria stood silent, staring at the ground. "I know I can't change what happened," Arthur continued, "but I want you to know that at least while you're here, you're not alone." Maria looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. For the first time, she saw something genuine in Arthur, something that made her reconsider her opinion of him. "Thank you," she said finally, before heading back into the mansion. Arthur stayed there for a while, gazing at the starry sky. For the first time in years, he felt he might be beginning to understand the true value of the people around him. The night was particularly cold, and the Montero mansion felt quieter than usual. Maria, sitting in her room, looked out the window, watching the city lights in the distance. Though surrounded by luxury, she felt lonelier than ever. Her conversation with Arthur about her past still echoed in her mind. She was about to turn off the lights when she heard a soft knock at the door. Confused, she stood and opened it to find Arthur standing there with an unreadable expression. "Sorry to bother you so late," he began hesitantly, "but I need to talk." Maria raised an eyebrow. Arthur never showed hesitation, and seeing this side of him intrigued her. "About what?" "About us and this situation," he said, gesturing vaguely. She stepped aside, letting him in. Arthur walked into the room, pacing as if trying to gather his thoughts. Finally, he turned to her, crossing his arms. "I know I pressured you into this arrangement," he began, his voice lower than usual. "And I know I haven't exactly been kind." Maria tilted her head, surprised by his humble tone. "Is this an apology?" Arthur gave a crooked smile. "Maybe it is. I'm not very good at this." She crossed her arms, watching him curiously. "Why are you saying this now?" "Because I've realized you deserve more than what I've offered so far," he admitted, looking directly at her. Maria was silent for a few moments, processing his words. It was the first time Arthur seemed truly vulnerable. "I never asked for anything, Arthur," she said softly. "All I did was agree to the terms of your game." "I know," he replied quickly. "But I also know you deserve respect, and that's something I've failed to give you." The sincerity in his voice shook something inside her. Maria felt her anger and resentment begin to fade, though she wasn't ready to forgive him entirely. "Respect is a good start," she said finally. Arthur nodded, relieved. "Can I stay here for a while?" "If you promise not to criticize my simple furniture, I suppose you can," she replied, a touch of humor bringing a genuine smile to his face. As the night wore on, the two found themselves sitting on the floor, sharing a bottle of wine Maria had stashed in a drawer. Their conversation flowed naturally, surprising them both. Arthur opened up about his childhood, something he rarely did. He spoke about the pressures of growing up in a wealthy family where emotions were seen as weaknesses and results were all that mattered. "My mother always said love was a distraction," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "She said relationships are like business deals. You go into them expecting a return." Maria chuckled softly. "That explains a lot." "Don't be so quick to judge me," he said with a tired smile. "I know I'm a product of this environment, but sometimes I wonder how things might have been different." Maria observed him for a moment, trying to imagine what was behind that cold, controlled facade. "You can still change, Arthur." "You think so?" He looked at her, genuinely curious. "I think anyone can change if they want to," she replied with conviction. Arthur's eyes softened. "What about you? What would you change if you could?" Maria was silent for a few moments. "I wish I'd been stronger in the past. Maybe my brothers would still be with me if I had fought harder." "Maria, you did everything you could," he said firmly. "You can't blame yourself for that." "That's easy for you to say," she murmured, looking down. Arthur leaned forward, holding her gaze. "You're the strongest person I know, and if no one's ever told you that before, I'm telling you now." Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes, but didn't let them fall. Instead, she gave a faint smile. "Thank you, Arthur." In the days that followed, their relationship began to change subtly. Though they still exchanged playful remarks, there was now a layer of understanding and respect between them. One afternoon, Maria was in the garden tending to the flowers when Arthur approached with a relaxed expression. "I need your help," he said. Maria turned, surprised. "Help with what?" "I have an important meeting tonight, and I think it would be good if you came with me." She raised an eyebrow. "You want me to attend a business meeting with you?" Arthur nodded. "You're my wife, remember?" Maria laughed. "I thought that was just to fool your friends." "Maybe," he said with a slight smile, "but I think your perspective could be valuable." She paused, considering the situation. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but don't expect me to sit there quietly like some accessory." "I wouldn't expect anything less from you," he replied with a glint of amusement in his eyes. That evening, they arrived at the meeting together, and once again, Maria felt all eyes on her. But instead of shrinking back, she held her head high, bolstered by Arthur's presence at her side. When one of the investors began questioning the ethical values of a new project, Maria, to everyone's surprise, spoke up. "With all due respect," she began, "I don't think profit and ethics have to be mutually exclusive. It's possible to achieve financial success without compromising the values that truly matter." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. Arthur, standing beside her, couldn't hide his proud smile. The meeting leader, an elderly man in an impeccable suit, nodded slowly. "An interesting perspective, Mrs. Montero. I'd like to hear more." Arthur looked at Maria with admiration, once again realizing how different she was from anyone he had ever known. Back at the mansion, Maria was exhausted but satisfied. She kicked off her shoes and collapsed on the living room sofa. Arthur entered shortly after, hands in his pockets. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You were incredible tonight." "Thank you," she said with a tired smile. "I'm not just saying that to flatter you," he continued. "I truly think you have something special, Maria." She looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "Arthur, what's happening to you?" He laughed, sitting next to her. "Maybe you're changing me." Maria gave a faint smile but didn't respond. Deep down, she knew something was shifting between them, though she wasn't sure what it meant. The week passed quickly, and Arthur decided it was time to introduce Maria to the most exclusive circle of society, the famous annual Elite Ball, a luxurious event attended by the country's most powerful names. Maria, however, didn't share his enthusiasm. When Arthur first mentioned the event, she nearly dropped her coffee cup. "A ball? What do you mean, a ball?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "It's an important event," Arthur explained calmly. "And now, as my wife, you'll be the center of attention." Maria huffed, crossing her arms. "Arthur, I can barely handle formal dinners. Do you really think I'll feel comfortable in a place full of people judging every detail about me?" He shrugged. "You've already proven you can handle difficult situations. It won't be as bad as you think." Maria narrowed her eyes. "Easy for you to say. You were born into this world. I'm going to be a target in there, and you know it." Arthur sighed, rubbing his temple. "Yes, they'll judge you, but you don't have to care about that. You're not there to please them." "Then why am I going?" she asked. "Because it matters to me," Arthur replied sincerely. Maria stayed silent for a few moments, realizing that, for the first time, Arthur wasn't forcing or demanding. He was asking. "All right," she said finally, "but if anyone insults me, I'm going to respond." Arthur gave a slight smile. "That's all I expect from you." On the day of the ball, Clara and her team arrived early to prepare Maria. The mansion was transformed into an improvised atelier, with fabrics, jewelry, and makeup artists occupying every corner. Maria looked visibly uncomfortable as the team adjusted the gown on her, a long, elegant silver dress with shimmering details. She glanced at herself in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. "You look stunning," Clara said, adjusting the hem of the dress. Maria gave a hesitant smile. "I don't know, it doesn't feel like me." Clara took her hands gently. "You may be wearing something different, but you're still you. Don't forget that." Maria nodded, taking a deep breath. She needed all the courage she could muster to face what lay ahead. When she descended the stairs, Arthur was waiting in the grand entry hall, dressed in a flawless tuxedo. As he saw her, he stopped, his eyes scanning every detail. "You look breathtaking," he said, his tone more honest than formal. Maria blushed slightly, glancing away. "Thank you. You don't look so bad yourself." Arthur offered his arm, and she took it, feeling like she was stepping into uncharted territory. The ballroom where the ball was held was a spectacle in itself. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, illuminating tables adorned with exotic flowers and golden candelabras. A live orchestra filled the room with an elegant melody. As soon as Maria and Arthur entered, all eyes turned toward them. There were whispers, evaluating glances, and even a few stifled laughs. Maria's stomach twisted, but she kept her head held high, remembering Arthur's advice. "They're all staring at me," she whispered, leaning toward Arthur. "Let them stare," he replied calmly. "They've got nothing better to do." Maria gave a faint smile, appreciating his support. The evening began with formal introductions. Arthur guided her from one group to another, presenting Maria as his wife. Some were polite but distant, while others were openly condescending. One woman in particular, Vanessa Belmont, stood out. Tall, blonde, and strikingly beautiful, she radiated an air of superiority. Vanessa approached Arthur with a charming smile, entirely ignoring Maria. "Arthur, darling, it's so good to see you," Vanessa said, lightly placing a hand on his arm. "And who is this distinguished young lady?" Maria narrowed her eyes, but before she could respond, Arthur stepped in. "Vanessa, this is my wife, Maria." Vanessa raised her eyebrows, as if she had heard something absurd, but quickly masked it with a polite handshake. "Ah, of course. A pleasure to meet you, Maria." "The pleasure is all mine," Maria replied, keeping her composure. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, assessing Maria like a predator sizing up its prey. "You know, Maria, it takes a lot of courage to step into this world. Not everyone can handle it." Maria offered a sweet smile, but her eyes were sharp. "Thank you for the advice. I imagine it must be difficult, especially for those who try too hard." Arthur suppressed a laugh as Vanessa recoiled slightly, visibly unsettled. When the music shifted to a waltz, Arthur extended his hand to Maria. "Shall we dance?" Maria hesitated, glancing around the room. "I'm not very good at this." "Neither am I," he said with a smile. "But let's pretend we are." She took his hand, and they moved to the center of the ballroom. As they danced, Maria realized that despite everything, she felt surprisingly at ease by Arthur's side. "You're doing well," he said, guiding her across the floor. "Maybe that's because you're not stepping on my feet," she teased. Arthur chuckled, and for a moment, it felt like they were in a world of their own, far from the judgmental stares. Later that night, as Maria rested at a table, one of Arthur's friends, Thomas, approached. "So, Maria," he began with an ironic smile, "how are you enjoying your role as the perfect wife?" Maria crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. "Quite well, thank you." Thomas laughed, though there was a cruel undertone to it. "I have to admit, you're doing better than I expected. But tell me, how long do you think it will last?" Maria felt anger rising, but kept her composure. "Thomas, what exactly are you trying to prove?" "Me? Nothing," he replied, feigning innocence. "I just find it fascinating how Arthur managed to find someone so unconventional." Before Maria could respond, Arthur appeared, placing a firm hand on Thomas's shoulder. "That's enough, Thomas." Thomas shrugged, raising his hands in surrender. "Relax, Arthur. Just having a little fun." Arthur held his stern gaze until Thomas backed off. Then he turned to Maria. "Sorry about that," he said. "No need to apologize," she replied. "I can handle people like him." Arthur looked at her for a moment, admiring her strength. "I know you can." When they finally left the ball, Maria felt immediate relief. In the car, as the city lights passed by the window, she turned to Arthur. "Why did you really bring me here?" she asked. "Because I wanted them to see who you are," he answered without hesitation. Maria gave a faint smile, but said nothing. For the first time, she felt that Arthur saw her as more than just a pawn in his game. The days after the ball brought a different atmosphere to the Montero mansion. Maria and Arthur began to understand each other in ways neither of them expected. Yet their newfound connection also brought new tensions. As Maria began to lower her defenses, Arthur seemed increasingly troubled by something he wouldn't reveal. Maria noticed it in small gestures: the nights he stayed late at the office, the distant look during dinners, and conversations that occasionally ended abruptly when personal topics surfaced. One morning, as she entered the library searching for a book, Maria found Arthur sitting at the desk, staring at a picture frame in his hands. He didn't notice her presence until she cleared her throat. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing his melancholic expression. Arthur quickly set the frame back on the desk and tried to mask his feelings. "Yeah, just memories from the past." Maria approached, curious. She saw that the photo showed a younger couple, clearly Arthur's parents, standing next to a boy she assumed was Arthur as a child. The smiles in the photo contrasted with the tense expression he wore now. "They look happy," Maria said softly. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They seemed happy, but the truth is rarely as simple as a photograph." Maria sat in the chair across from him. "Want to talk about it?" Arthur hesitated. He wasn't the type to share feelings or vulnerabilities, but something about Maria invited trust. "My father was difficult," he began in a low voice. "He believed that the only way to succeed was through complete control controlling people, business, even family. And my mother, she just went along with it, never questioned him. Maria sensed the bitterness in his voice. And you grew up in the middle of that. Arthur nodded. He expected me to follow in his footsteps, to become a copy of him. And for a long time I did exactly that. I convinced myself he was right, that the world was a place where only the strongest survive. What about your mother? What did she think? Arthur looked away, as though the answer weighed heavily on him. She always said family came first, but in practice she chose my father and his demands over everything. She never stood up for us. Maria sat silently, processing what he had said. For the first time, it felt like she was seeing the real Arthur, the man behind the cold, confident facade. Maybe that's why you're so reserved, she said carefully. Arthur gave a dry laugh. Reserved is a generous word. The truth is, I learned not to trust anyone. It's easier that way. Maria leaned forward, locking eyes with him. But you don't have to live that way, Arthur. You can be different. He looked at her for a moment, as though trying to believe her words. But before he could respond, the mansion's doorbell echoed through the halls, breaking the moment. The sound was insistent, as if whoever was outside wouldn't leave until answered. Arthur and Maria made their way to the entrance, where Marcos, Arthur's assistant, was already checking the security monitor. "It's Thomas," Marcos said, his voice tinged with concern. Arthur frowned. "What does he want now?" When the door opened, Thomas entered with his usual arrogance, but there was something different about him. He seemed more aggressive, almost furious. "Arthur, we need to talk," Thomas said, ignoring Maria's presence. "I'm listening," Arthur replied, folding his arms. Thomas glanced at Maria and rolled his eyes. "In private." "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her," Arthur said firmly. Thomas let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, so now she's your confidant? Interesting, considering what's at stake." Maria frowned, feeling her discomfort grow. "What's going on?" Arthur shot a cold glance at Thomas. "Say what you came here to say." Thomas pulled a folder from inside his jacket and placed it on the table. "Here's everything. Proof that your bet went too far." Maria froze. "Bet? What bet?" Arthur closed his eyes, as if the weight of the moment were crushing him. He had known the truth would come out eventually, but not like this. Not so suddenly. "Maria," Thomas began, his tone cruel. "Arthur made a bet with us. He said he could marry someone like you, a woman completely outside his world, and keep you by his side for 3 months. It was all a game to him. You were just a piece on his chessboard." The silence that followed was devastating. Maria looked at Arthur, waiting for him to deny it, to say Thomas was lying. But he said nothing. "Arthur?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Maria, Arthur tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. She stepped back, feeling as though the ground beneath her had vanished. So all of this was a lie? Every word, every gesture? "It's not that simple," he said desperately. Maria laughed bitterly, but there was no joy in her laughter. "Not simple? You played with my life, Arthur. You used me for some stupid bet." "Maria, please, listen to me," he said, moving closer. "No," she shouted, stepping away. "I don't want to hear anything else. You're exactly the man I thought you were when I first met you, cold, selfish, and incapable of caring about anyone but yourself." Thomas, satisfied with the chaos he had caused, gave a condescending smile. "Well, I think my work here is done. Enjoy the evening." He left, leaving Maria and Arthur alone. Maria took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I can't stay here, Arthur. Not after this." "Maria, please," he pleaded. "I know I was wrong, but it wasn't just that. I truly care about you." She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "If you cared, you never would have done this." Without waiting for a response, Maria went upstairs and began packing her things. Arthur remained in the room, feeling utterly defeated. For the first time in his life, he realized he had lost something money couldn't buy. Maria left the mansion that night, refusing Arthur's offer to drive her. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she needed to leave. The pain of his betrayal was too deep to ignore. As the rideshare car took her away, Maria stared at the city lights, trying to find a way back to herself. Arthur, meanwhile, stayed alone in his study, staring into the emptiness. He knew he had made the greatest mistake of his life, and now all he could do was face the consequences. Maria spent the following weeks away from the Montero mansion, staying in a modest boarding house on the outskirts of the city. She used part of the money Arthur had given her to rent a small room and began looking for work. The void left by his betrayal was hard to ignore, but Maria knew she had to move forward. Arthur, on the other hand, felt the weight of her absence. The mansion, once full of life during the months Maria had been there, now seemed cold and lifeless. He spent his nights secluded in his office, staring at the folder and the contract that had started it all. One afternoon, Marcos, Arthur's assistant, entered the office holding a piece of paper. "Mr. Montero," he said hesitantly, "I've managed to locate Mrs. Maria." Arthur looked up, surprised. He had asked Marcos to find out where she was, but wasn't sure if she would ever let him approach her again. "Is she all right?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "She's working as a waitress at a cafe downtown," Marcos replied. Arthur remained silent for a moment, processing the information. He knew he had to see her, but also knew he couldn't just show up without something meaningful to say. "Get the car ready," he said at last. Maria was wiping down a table in the small cafe where she had started working when she heard the bell above the door chime. She didn't pay much attention, accustomed to the comings and goings of customers, until she heard a familiar voice. "Maria." She turned and saw Arthur standing there, dressed in a flawless suit but with hesitant look she had never seen before. "Arthur?" she said, surprised and wary. "What are you doing here?" He stepped forward but kept a respectful distance. "I needed to talk to you." "There's nothing for us to talk about," she replied, turning back to the table she was cleaning. "Please, just give me 5 minutes," he said, almost pleading. Maria stopped and looked at him. There was something different about his posture, more humble. Against her better judgment, she nodded. 5 minutes, she said, motioning to an empty table. Arthur sat down while Maria remained standing, arms crossed. "I know I'm the last person you want to see," he began softly, "and I know what I did was unforgivable." "Then why are you here?" she asked firmly. "Because I realized you deserve so much more than I gave you," he said, "and I want to make things right, if you'll let me." Maria let out a bitter laugh. "Make things right? Arthur, you turned my life into a game. You used me to feed your ego. How exactly do you plan to fix that?" Arthur took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "I donated the money from the bet. Every penny. I don't want any of it tied to what happened between us." Maria looked at him, surprised. "You did that?" "Yes, but I know that doesn't erase what I did to you. I just want you to know that I regret it deeply." She was silent for a moment, processing his words. "And what do you want from me now, Arthur?" she finally asked. "I want a chance to prove I can be different," he said sincerely. "Not as part of a game, but because I care about you." Maria felt her heart tighten. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of being hurt lingered. "I need time," she said, her voice trembling. Arthur nodded, respecting her decision. "I'll wait as long as it takes." The weeks that followed brought significant changes to both their lives. Arthur began participating in social projects, something Maria had mentioned during their conversations at the mansion. He got directly involved, visiting underserved communities and listening to the stories of people facing struggles similar to Maria's past. Meanwhile, Maria continued working at the cafe, trying to reorganize her life. But no matter how much she tried, she couldn't get Arthur out of her thoughts. His words at the cafe echoed in her mind, and she began to wonder if he had truly changed. One day, while shopping at the market, Maria ran into Clara, the stylist who had worked with her at the mansion. "Maria, what a surprise," Clara said warmly, hugging her. Maria smiled. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "Oh, I'm visiting a social project in the neighborhood." Clara replied, "Arthur has been coordinating some amazing initiatives here. He's really dedicated." Maria was taken aback. She knew Arthur had the money to support any cause, but she never imagined him getting personally involved. "Was he here today?" Maria asked, trying to hide her curiosity. "Yes, and you should see him, Maria. He's not the same man he used to be." Clara's words lingered in Maria's mind as she walked home. Something inside her told her it might be time to hear Arthur out. The next morning, Maria decided to go to the mansion. She felt a mix of nervousness and determination as she walked through the gate. Arthur was in the garden, talking with a group of children participating in an educational project. He seemed different, more relaxed, more human. When he saw her, he froze for a moment before walking toward her. Maria, he said with a hesitant smile. I wasn't expecting to see you here. I needed to see for myself, she replied, glancing around. Clara told me about the projects you've been doing. Arthur nodded, stuffing his hands in his pockets. You were the one who inspired me, Maria. I realized I had never used my power for anything truly meaningful, until I met you. She observed him for a moment, trying to read the sincerity in his eyes. You've really changed, haven't you? She asked, almost in a whisper. I'm trying, he said, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you. Maria took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Arthur, I don't know if I can forget what happened, but maybe I can forgive you. His eyes lit up. That's all I could ask for. Their meeting in the garden reignited a spark between Maria and Arthur, but they both knew the path to rebuilding their relationship would be long and filled with uncertainties. After the conversation, Maria accepted Arthur's invitation to have lunch at the mansion, a small step toward regaining some sense of normalcy. During lunch, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Maria, who'd once been hesitant and guarded, seemed more at ease, while Arthur showed a vulnerable and attentive side she had never seen before. I saw the children in the garden, Maria said, breaking the silence. You're really involved in these projects, aren't you? Arthur nodded, placing his napkin beside his plate. Yes, for the first time using my money for something meaningful makes me feel human, and I owe that to you. Maria tilted her head, intrigued. To me? Yes, he replied with a soft smile. You made me realize how disconnected I was from reality. Your stories, your strength, they made me question who I was and what I was doing with my life. Maria felt a tightness in her chest. Arthur's words sounded sincere, but the fear of trusting again still lingered. Arthur, she began, carefully choosing her words. It's not enough to say you've changed. Actions are what truly matter. I know, he said without hesitation. That's why I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you that I'm a different man. In the days that followed, Maria began accompanying Arthur to his social projects. He invited her to visit a community school being renovated with funds he had donated. Maria hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, curious to see how he would act in such an unfamiliar environment. When they arrived at the school, Arthur was greeted warmly by children and volunteers. He seemed genuinely interested in hearing their stories and the challenges faced by the community. Maria was impressed to see him interacting with a natural ease she hadn't expected. You're doing well, Maria said, watching Arthur talk with a teacher about the school's needs. He turned to her with a calm smile. I didn't realize how much this would mean to me. I never thought helping others could be so rewarding. Maria smiled back, feeling a growing connection to him. For the first time, she began to believe that Arthur's change was real. Despite their progress, Maria still needed time to process everything that had happened. She decided it would be best to maintain some distance while she sorted out her feelings. I need to get back to the cafe, she said one morning, as they had breakfast in the mansion. Arthur frowned, clearly disappointed, but he respected her decision. If that's what you need, I understand. Thank you, Maria said softly. But that doesn't mean I don't see what you're doing. I just need a little more time. Arthur nodded, knowing he couldn't rush things. I'll wait, Maria, as long as it takes. As Maria returned to her routine at the cafe, Arthur continued dedicating himself to his projects. He spent hours in meetings with nonprofits, community leaders, and volunteers, trying to make up for the years he had ignored the world around him. During one of these meetings, Clara, who was also involved in the projects, approached him. You've changed, Arthur, Clara said with a smile. Maria would be proud of what you're doing. Arthur offered a modest smile. I just hope she sees it one day. Clara placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. She already does, but trust her timing. Maria isn't someone who's easily swayed by words alone. You're showing her you're capable of more. Arthur nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. One afternoon, as Maria was serving customers at the cafe, a group of children came running in, followed by Arthur. He was dressed casually, something rare, and carried a bag full of books. Maria approached him, surprised. Arthur, what are you doing here? I promised to bring books for the kids, and they insisted on coming with me, he said, motioning toward the children who were already flipping through the books. Maria laughed, shaking her head. You really have changed, haven't you? I'm trying, he said sincerely, and I hope you can see that. Maria looked at him for a moment, feeling a mix of emotions. She knew she was beginning to trust him again, but the fear still lingered deep inside. That evening, as Maria closed the cafe, she found an envelope on the counter. Inside was a handwritten letter from Arthur. Maria, I know words can't undo what I've done, but I hope they can at least show you how much you've changed my life. Before I met you, I lived in a hollow world, surrounded by things that never truly meant anything. You showed me that there's more to life than money and power. For that, I'll always be grateful. I know that regaining your trust will take time, but I'm willing to wait. Not because it's part of a game or a challenge, but because you're the only person who's ever made me want to be a better man. With affection, Arthur. Maria felt tears streaming down her face as she read the letter. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, she felt she could give him a second chance. The sun shone brightly that morning as Maria set the cafe tables, thinking about how her life had changed since leaving the Montero mansion. It had been 3 months, and although she had rebuilt part of her routine, something still felt incomplete. Then she heard the doorbell ring. Looking up, she saw Arthur standing there, dressed simply, with an expression she had never seen before, a mix of nervousness and hope. "Arthur," she said, surprised, "what are you doing here?" He took a step forward, hesitating before speaking. "I needed to see you, Maria. I had to say something I can't keep inside anymore." She crossed her arms, trying to maintain the emotional distance she had built. "I think we've said everything there was to say, don't you?" "Maybe," he replied, his eyes fixed on her. "But I couldn't let you walk out of my life without trying again, without telling you how much you changed who I am." Maria took a deep breath and placed the cloth she was holding on the counter. "And what exactly do you want from me now, Arthur? Another chance to prove you can win at anything." "No," he said quickly. "I never want to hurt you again, Maria. I just want you to know that the man you met during that stupid contract is gone. You showed me that life is about so much more than power or money. I'm here because I want to be a man worthy of you." Maria's heart raced, but she kept her composure. His words sounded sincere, but the wounds of betrayal weren't fully healed. "Have you really changed, Arthur?" she asked in almost a whisper. "I'm trying, Maria," he said firmly. "And all I want is a chance to show you, not with words, but with actions." Maria remained silent, searching his eyes for sincerity. Finally, she said, "Change takes time, Arthur, so does forgiveness." "I know," he replied with a faint smile. "And I'm willing to wait as long as it takes." The weeks that followed were filled with encounters between Maria and Arthur. He took her to see the social projects he had started, while she invited him to see her world at the cafe. Gradually, Maria began to notice that the man by her side now was different from the one she had met months ago. One day, Arthur invited her to a charity event in an underserved neighborhood where he had been working. Maria accepted, curious to see how he behaved in those settings. During the event, as Arthur spoke about the changes being implemented in the community, he looked directly at Maria in the audience and smiled. After his speech, he approached her and extended his hand. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Arthur led her back to the mansion, specifically to the garden, where so many important conversations had taken place. But this time, the place was transformed. The garden was illuminated by rows of lights hanging from the trees, and a path of flower petals led to an arch decorated with white and red roses. Under the arch, a small table with 2 chairs was set, complete with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses waiting for them. Maria was speechless as she took in the scene. "Arthur? What is this?" "Something I needed to do," he said, guiding her down the path. When they reached the arch, Arthur held her hands firmly. "Maria, you've changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. Before you, I was an empty man, obsessed with control and success. But you showed me what truly matters: people, connections, love." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she let him continue. "I know our beginning was wrong, and I can't change the past, but what I can do is promise you a better future, if you'll let me." Arthur released her hands for a moment and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He slowly knelt down, looking at her with the most vulnerable expression Maria had ever seen. Maria, he began, his voice trembling, I don't want you to be my wife because of a contract or a bet. I want you to be my wife because I love you. I want to build a life with you based on respect, trust, and true love. Will you marry me? For real this time? Maria covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming freely down her face. Her heart was torn between the pain of the past and the hope for the future, but as she looked at Arthur, she saw sincerity, regret, and love. Yes, Arthur, she said, her voice trembling. I accept. Arthur's face lit up with a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He stood up, pulling her into a tight embrace, and the two of them remained there under the lights and the floral arch, as if the world around them had disappeared. The ceremony took place 2 months later in the same garden. This time, the setting was even more breathtaking, adorned with fresh flowers and candles that created a magical atmosphere. Maria wore a white dress with delicate embroidery, her hair styled in an elegant bun with small white flowers woven through it. Arthur, in a classic black suit, stood at the altar, his eyes shining with emotion. As Maria walked down the aisle, each step carried the promise of a new beginning. The guests, friends, volunteers, and people who had become significant in both their lives watched in silence, moved by the union that was finally happening in a genuine way. During the vows, Arthur held Maria's hands and said, Maria, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I promise to love you, respect you, and stand by your side through every moment, good or bad. Thank you for giving me the chance to become a better man. With tears in her eyes, Maria replied, Arthur, you've shown me that people can change, and that true love requires courage. I promise to walk by your side always as we build our life together. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, they kissed as the crowd erupted into warm applause and petals were tossed into the air. The reception was filled with music, laughter, and dancing. Arthur and Maria, hand in hand, cherished every moment, knowing they had overcome the past and were ready to build a future together. What do you think? Did Maria do the right thing by forgiving and marrying Arthur? Share your opinion in the comments below. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to keep up with all our stories, and check out more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.